And we're back. This is the Good Things Jackson Show. I'm your host, Brad Kamikaze Franklin. And as we talked about before we went to break, we've got Mr. Christopher Pike. He is the new executive director of the Jackson Redevelopment Authority, and he is here with us today. We're going to talk about a lot of the good things those guys have going on right now in the city of Jackson, some of the plans. I know you guys have been interested. I know you guys have heard a few things about Farish Street, and of course it always gets the city talking. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. But Chris, first of all, thank you for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be here. Thanks.
Appreciate you for being here. So let's do a little backstory. Let's talk about, what actually got you here to the city of Jackson. So tell us who you are, where you're from, your claim to fame, and tell us how you ended up coming over here to the city of Jackson. I think you said February the 5th was your first day here officially. So you've hit the ground running. But tell the folks a little bit about yourself, those who might not know who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I wouldn't suspect a lot of people know who I am because, I've never even been to Mississippi before February. So
really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So, but let me back up. I did have a young man that I helped raise, dropped him off at Delta State, but that was it.
Okay, he was in the Delta.
Yeah,
that's Mississippi. Right.
But it's Mississippi. But so I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. Raised there. I moved to Atlanta. I was maybe 6 or 7. And spent all of my youth there, and then moved to Albany. Went to Albany State University and go Rams.
Yeah.
And, spent after I graduated, spent 20 years in Albany, got married, raised a family, that type of stuff, and then decided to come back to Atlanta area. So I came back in 2015 doing economic development work. While in Albany, I did a whole bunch of stuff. I was an elected official, so I was on the city council.
Okay.
I operated businesses. Had some success in business, some failed.
Right,
just like every other human being that goes out and trying to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, absolutely.
And did that. Decided to move back to the Atlanta area. Started out in a small community in West Georgia called Villarica. Did economic development under Main Street. I was over the Convention and Visitors Bureau, so I have some tourism background. And then was recruited to come to South Fulton, Georgia, which is a new city that they created in 2017, which is in a lot of respects very similar to Jackson. Albany is similar as well. Albany is about 75% African American. City of South Fulton is about 92% African American. And so helped them set up their economic development department there, stayed there 3.5, almost 4 years. And then left and started my own economic development consulting firm.
Okay.
So in addition to that, I got licensed. So I'm also a commercial broker as well. Okay. In Georgia, so I do commercial real estate, economic development consulting work.
All right.
And I was working along, and it happens, 3 or 4 times a year. An executive search firm reaches out to me on LinkedIn, said, "Hey, we think you'd be perfect for a job." And so JRA had hired an executive search firm that reached out to me and said, "Hey, we got a job we think you'd be perfect for. Would you mind looking at it?" And I said, "Sure, send me the information." It's always, pleasantries always. Yeah. And sent me the information. I was like, "Oh, okay, this is pretty interesting. You want me to come to Jackson, Mississippi?" And so kind of did the same thing, and they reached back out and said, "Hey, we really would like to, present you to the board for an interview." And so kind of looked at it some more and did some research about Jackson, and then really just kind of was intrigued about the opportunity to really be impactful and do some really forward-thinking economic development. And I always like a good challenge. And so I interviewed. We did an interview with the executive search firm that they moved me to the executive committee that was responsible for JRA. And then the executive search firm called me a couple weeks later and said, "Hey, they want you to come out to Jackson and do an interview." And I was like, "Okay, great." Came out. It's a 2-day interview process. I met with anybody and everybody under the sun. We had a community meeting where I did a presentation to the community about my thoughts on what we should be doing in Jackson, and got back on a plane and flew back to Atlanta. Didn't think anything else about it, and then about 2 weeks later, executive search firm said, "Hey, we need to start negotiating a contract."
Wow.
And I said, "Okay," and I turned over our business partners in my businesses, turned over control of the businesses and said, hey, I'm going to Jackson, Mississippi to go do some transformative work, and been here since February 5th.
So I'm interested, of course, when you say you did your research on Jackson, Mississippi, it's always interesting to hear perspectives from people who have not been here, right. Who have been in other places that may not have been tainted sometimes by the negative narrative that we get from a lot of people here and from the press. In a particular sense. So in doing your research, when they said, okay, we have this job for you in Jackson, Mississippi, I'm interested to see, what did you find as someone doing research on this city when you were trying to come here? What were some of the things that you ran across?
Well, I mean, it's no secret. I mean, Mississippi is the poorest state in the country. Mm-hmm. Jackson, Mississippi is the fastest shrinking as far as population city in the country. Mm-hmm. Of course, there's lots of news stories about the water crisis. Mm-hmm. A lot of the socioeconomic stuff that goes along with a city that has a high population of African Americans. Right. And so read articles about money that disappeared on Farish Street, you know, so, just a gamut of stories. Right. But one of the things that I think we don't really put in perspective is that all cities have their home set of issues. And you and I were talking before the show started about the Atlanta water crisis.
Yes, absolutely.
And, Atlanta is the third fastest growing metro in the country, right? Mm-hmm. There's about 60,000 people move into metro Atlanta every year. Yeah. And so even though Atlanta is considered to be a thriving city, it has issues with crime. Buckhead, which is a very affluent neighborhood and community in Atlanta, people think Buckhead's a separate city. It's not. It's in the city of Atlanta. But they're trying to de-annex from the city, to create their own city because of crime. Yeah. We know that they had the water main break. It's been going on the last 2 days. That's really been a major issue because we've had to close down restaurants. Hotels are trying to decide whether or not they're responsible for giving refunds for room nights. Right. They had to cancel the Megan Thee Stallion concert that was supposed to be at State Farm Arena, all because of this water main break issue. And if you listen to that news story, you think, oh, well, that's the same thing I hear about Jackson, about the restaurants complaining about not having water. So, we kind of look negatively about a place, but not realizing that there's other places that have the same issues. We just look at it through a different lens because it's, somewhere else. And so when I looked at all that news story, to me it was just like, okay, this is just another city that needs some good leadership to come in and help transform the narrative about what people think. But all the bones, the infrastructure is here to really do transformative work, and that's the reason why I came here.
So on first look, day one, you hit the ground running. You are in charge of trying to figure out this thing with downtown development that we've been trying to get figured out here for decades. What were some of the things that stood out to you the most? I'd say on the positive end, and then some things on the other end of the spectrum that you saw immediately was going to need some work.
Sure. Well, I'm generally very honest, maybe to a fault at some point.
That's what we need. That's what we need.
But I'm going to be very transparent here. So, JRA as an organization had some internal issues that needed to be addressed, and so we've been working very feverishly to do that, because if you don't have the right foundation from the structural standpoint of the organization, all the other stuff's not going to matter. And so just coming in, looking at our organization, look at things that we do well, because there are some great things that JRA does really well. One of the things I think we do well is being plugged into the community. I think we make ourselves accessible. I know that our board has been doing a lot of great work. They are all over the community doing stuff. So there are things we do well, but then there's other things that we need to look at from an organizational structure standpoint. So one of the things that I'm really excited about is that we actually have our first CFO that's coming on board. She actually starts Monday. And so that CFO is going to help us really beef up our work around the financial components of JRA, because it takes money to do stuff. And you got to have that part of your business in order to be able to be successful. One of the other things that we want to do, in addition to that, is to bring on a grants administrator. So hopefully in the next month or two, we'll be bringing that person on, because a lot of the stuff that we do here in Jackson, we qualify for grant funding, but that's a full-time job, right? And I, as the ED, have a whole bunch of other stuff to do. And so bringing that person on to help us with programming For example, one of the things we know that in downtown, we have food desert, right? So access to healthy food. I live at Standard Life, so I have to drive out somewhere to go get groceries, or DoorDash, which I've fallen in love with since I've been here. But you have to bring that, so looking at where can we bring those type of amenities. You look at the USDA website, and it has all of downtown identified as an area that is, severely underserved by healthy food choices. And so, we could bring in USDA funding to help stand up a, farmer's market or something of that nature to create an avenue for people to be able to bring healthy food choices to downtown. So a grants administrator will help us look at different things like that I think will be impactful to the community. The other thing is, we have $2.1 million from Congressman Thompson, and then the state also gave us another $2 million to invest into Union Station. We're in the process of doing a master plan, a TOD master plan, where it's basically a 3/4 mile radius around Union Station. Everything from walking trails, from new bike lanes, looking at the motorized scooters as an option for transportation. Looking at what we can do with the convention center. So from a structural standpoint, from organization, we need to be able to get straight to be able to look at how do we impact those things.
I think one of the important things that I try to do on the show is I try to give the lay people the information that they need to actually have sound opinions. People have heard about JRA, they've heard about the Jackson Redevelopment Authority. But I don't think a lot of people understand how the entity works,
right,
and what its actual job is. It's kind of a quasi-governmental type of entity, that runs the gamut of, people saying that JRA is like the evil empires, like Cobra Commander and Serpentor over here running this thing, and they're manipulating what's going on in downtown behind the scenes, and they're taking money here and they're doing this. I don't think a lot of people even understand what JRA is supposed to do. So let's backtrack a little bit and kind of explain to them what exactly the job of the Jackson Redevelopment Authority is.
Correct. Well, that's a great question. So JRA is basically a creature of the state. So the state of Mississippi created these redevelopment authority laws that basically allow municipalities to create these authorities for the purposes of bringing reinvestment into the urban renewal areas that's set up by the city. So basically what the city does is it says it has a specific concentration of slum and blight, and that they want to bring investment into that area, and then the city creates an urban renewal zone or urban renewal area, and then they hand that off to JRA, and JRA has a plethora of tools that's given to it by either the state of Mississippi or the city of Jackson that allows us to do any types of projects. So we can do, a lot of people don't realize this because we don't really do a lot of this, but the ability for tax, we can levy taxes, we can do infrastructure improvements, sidewalks, roads, all of that stuff in those urban renewal zones. The biggest thing that we historically have done is more of just bond financing projects. And so if you think about King Edward Hotel, Standard Life, the Westin Hotel, all of those were projects that JRA participated in from a financing standpoint that made those projects happen. When you look at what's going on with the $20 million planetarium renovation, so JRA is actually managing the financial component of that $20 million investment into the planetarium. And so if it were not for JRA, you wouldn't have those projects. There's things that we're looking at doing in the future. We're participating and partnering with the city on the hotel, the convention center hotel that has been proposed for many, many years. We have proposals. I know you had Jai Keaton on earlier that talked a little bit about that. But we're participating in that process. And then, of course, the work that we do on Farish Street, we own 2 blocks, pretty much all of the property in 2 blocks. There's a couple of parcels that we don't own, but we own, if you look at individual addresses, we own 15 buildings in those 2 blocks of Farish Street that we're working to bring new investment in. So in a nutshell, we do any number of things to help get investment into these urban renewal zones within the city of Jackson. And they're not just downtown.
Mm-hmm.
There's one on Highway 80
Okay.
that we're sponsored. There's one around Jackson State University.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not just downtown.
Not just downtown. I got you. So let's talk about Farish Street. I think you mentioned it. I was going to kind of save it a little bit for later, but let's get into it now. Being a citizen of Jackson, having actually worked with a group that was supposed to be revitalizing it, many years ago, people have heard about the, revitalization of Farish Street for probably 3 decades. They've heard it through several different administrations, as far as back as Harvey Johnson's first administration. We've been talking about Farish Street and what's going to happen on Farish Street for, all of these years. You guys just had a press conference. I want you to talk about that press conference, talk about what that press conference means, particularly for that green space, and then we'll start talking about you guys actually, putting together these tours so people can start looking at some of these parcels and you guys' efforts to get tenants in. But let's talk about the monies that you just received in the press conference that you guys had on the other day. What was that about for those who missed it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have partnered with 2C Mississippi. They are an organization that deals with environmental issues, especially with heat islands. And so what they've done is they have done a study of Jackson and found that part of that 200 block of Farish Street is one of the hottest places in the city as far as being an urban heat island. And so they received $1.5 million from the U.S. Forestry Service to do basically heat mitigation there. Okay. But the beautiful thing about it is you can be creative. And so instead of just doing heat mitigation and planting a bunch of trees and stuff, we're actually doing a park where people can gather. So there'll be a stage there, very similar to the one that's there now. We're going to have a nicer stage that will be in the middle block so you have more room. Yep. And then there'll be a lot of green infrastructure that's put in. And so it will go along Town Creek, and then you will come over into the middle part of the 200 block on the south side of the Farish Street. There'll be a large green space there where you can sit, green lawn stage, and then the other part across the street will be kind of like an urban forest, if you will. So a lot of tree canopy that you can sit under. Really, really cool concept. It didn't go over well when I first got here. There's a little hesitance about that. And I was telling people, I was like, man, if you're in like Atlanta, people eat this stuff up all day. Like this is how the Beltline started, a project like this. And so for us, what I see it is that, that Farish Street Park being a trailhead for a trail that will connect. So we have the Mississippi Trail that's coming through. It's supposed to connect to Jackson State. So can we plug in Farish Street into that trail and have this be a trailhead? So I look at it from a bigger perspective than just, we're doing planting some trees. It's what are the other things that come out of that that you don't even think about just from that investment. So,
well, people here are, as you probably have noticed, are deathly afraid of change and new ideas in a lot of instances, and I'm sure a lot of us who try to be innovators here ran into that. Work through most of it, but there's going to be a lot of trepidation in dealing with Farish Street simply because people have heard so many things over the years. I think the trust in actually seeing something done in the lifetimes of a lot of people has just been lost over the years because of the stop and goes. You talk about the green space, you talk about that being the hottest area, one of the hottest areas in the city, and what your plans are there for that. I think one of the most important questions that people will have is if we have this green space down here, what we'll need is foot traffic. What we'll need is people walking down here. What we'll need is amenities and attractions for people to come down here. And I've seen that you guys have been putting together some tours for people to take a look at those parcels on the street. Where is that project as it relates to actually getting people down there in those buildings to create some of that foot traffic to make that park, more sensible to people who doubt it right now?
Sure. Well, we have two things that we're working on. So before I got here, the board put out RFPs for developers to basically submit proposals on what to do with buildings that GRA owns in the 200 block. From that process, the board has selected 5 developers. These are local mom and pop businesses that we are working with to get them the capacity that they need to be able to do these projects. One of the things that I talked about when I interviewed for the job is, people aren't breaking down the door to come do development deals in Jackson, Mississippi. It's just the reality. But it doesn't mean that we can't have nice things.
Right.
It just means that the way we approach it is going to be different. And so one of the things that I proposed was this Developers Academy, where we create local homegrown developers. And so this is kind of what that process is. Right? So we're dealing with people who are business owners, but they're not developers.
Right.
And it does take time when you're dealing with folks. Now, one of the groups, they are a developer, but the other ones are not. And so working with them to get them across the finish line obviously is going to take some time. And so what we're doing from a JRA standpoint is really being intentional about how do we help them. So one of the things that we're doing is in the next 30 to 60 days, we're going to be bringing on a historic tax credit consultant.
Okay.
And the reason why we're doing that is because in Mississippi, you get the Mississippi tax credit and the federal tax credit, which is 45% of your project cost. So think about if you have $1 million project and through historic tax credit, we're going to get 45% of your money to put into your project. That goes a long way. So now they only have to figure out how do I get the other 55% for my project. And so JRA is going to pay for that. And so there's 3 parts to the historic tax credit application. We're going to pay for each one of those steps for the developers. And that's something I think hasn't been done traditionally. I think everybody has come and is like, oh, we just want JRA to cut us a check so we can, do these projects.
Right.
And that's not how development works.
Exactly.
No responsible redevelopment or development organization is just going to come in and cut a check to a developer to go do stuff. We might as well just do it ourselves if we're just going to cut you a check to pay for everything.
Correct.
But there are things we can do. Like this is an incentive. Like if you go to a developer and say, I'm going to give you 45% of your project cost, developers going to eat that up all day, every day.
Yeah.
But it's not JRA cutting you a check.
Right.
We're just paying for the technical aspect to give you the tax credits. And the beautiful thing about Farish Street, because it's already a designated historic district, all of those buildings automatically qualify as long as you follow the National Park Service guidelines. And so that's something that we're really excited about. That's going to move the needle. The 300 block, I've already talked to the board about JRA just doing that ourselves. And so that way we're not partnering with the developer. It makes the process faster. And what we're going to do with that is we're going to do the historic tax credits, which is 45%, and then we're going to be looking for some new market tax credits to make up the other 50-55%. And then we will just hire
Do you have an idea of what you want to do on that block?
We're going to renovate the buildings and then lease them out. The goal is obviously restaurants, specialty retail, some professional services type thing. Basically what Farish Street was in the heyday. I tell people, I've been telling my team, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's already examples in the city of Jackson that would be great. Like if you think about Fondren, if Farish Street was like Fondren, I don't think anybody would be upset.
Right.
Right. So if you had that same type of vibe with the restaurants and the retail spaces, that would be a win. And so it's not this far-fetched thing that, because it's already being done in the city and other places. Even Baptist back there with the brewery. It's like there's spaces here that are already doing it. So it's not like it's something that we have to do this heavy lift to make work.
The debate has kind of been in a lot of people I've talked to that had different opinions. Of course, years ago the thought was, okay, we're going to create an entertainment district. I always felt like we should, do something that is more along the lines of a tribute to Mississippi. I don't like the idea of trying to copy what other people are doing. There were a lot of people who felt like we should make Farish Street into a new type of Beale Street. Or an entertainment district, and then there are some people who say, okay, it needs to be mixed, it needs to be this, there needs to be some housing down there, we need to have some people living in downtown to get that foot traffic. So the overall vision for JRA is what exactly? Is it an interesting mix of all of this? Are you guys going to try to get entertainment venues down there to get the foot traffic? Are you trying to get people to do a little bit of residential on the street? Like, what is your long-term goal with that?
Right, so this is probably going to get me in a little bit of trouble. I don't think the entertainment district idea was a recipe for success. Let me just put it that way. I don't think it is in keeping with the history of Farish Street. I understand the people's desires and what they were trying to do with that, and I don't necessarily disagree that you don't need an entertainment district in Jackson.
Right.
I just don't think Farish Street is where that should be.
That makes sense.
And that's just my professional opinion, because if you think about communities, while they have those little strips, the really thing that makes communities special is when you can go off the beaten path, go to the mom and pop places, and you get to really sense and authenticity of a community. And I think that's really the lasting legacy for Farish Street, is how do we get it back to what it originally was, and not just cookie cutter thing from Memphis or some other.
Absolutely.
And so I think from a historical standpoint, it's the appropriate thing to do. I think from a authenticity of what Jackson is, I think it's the appropriate thing to do. And I think it's just, when you think about this type of economic development, it has to be community driven. The people have to have a voice of what's going on. You can't just be like, oh, this is what we're going to do here, whether you like it or not.
Right.
That's not how you do community building, economic
Correct.
development. You got to have the voices there that say, hey, I remember when I went with Miss Davis when I was here for an interview. Miss Davis, that she runs Farish Street. So, so she and I spent some time together, and she just talked about growing up, like the businesses that were on Farish Street.
Yeah.
And those are the great stories that
Yes.
you want, and then when you bring it back, and people will say, "Oh, I never thought that we would ever see this again." That's really the story that you want for Farish
So
Street.
what are you guys doing to try to incorporate those stories and the people that have been there, the people who are living in that area, or the people who have been on the street, maybe some blocks up? Because what happens on those 2 blocks is going to affect what happens up the rest of the street.
Correct.
So you have people that have been thriving. Johnny T's has been thriving on Farish Street Burgers. You have people that I have known when I was working on the project at F. Jones and at Freeline, who actually came to that corner and that street because of what was being pitched to them as, what's going to happen with this entertainment district. So how much are you relying on all of those people who have been stakeholders on that street for a while, and the residents who live around that area, who have been there for all of their lives? How much are you relying on those people and some of the decisions that you're making?
Yeah, definitely. Those voices are important. Those are the ones that we want to hear. I know some people have difference in opinions one way or the other that are involved in Farish Street.
Mm-hmm.
Some want it to be, hearken to what it was back in the heyday. Some want it to be this, entertainment hub. There's people who did investment or bought investments in Farish Street thinking it was going to be an entertainment hub.
Absolutely.
And so I know there's various opinions on that, but those voices will be somewhere in the middle. I think that when you look at a place like Johnny T's or F. Jones Corner, those places are always going to have a home on Farish Street. I think there's room for more. So there'll be entertainment components of Farish Street. I just don't think that it needs to be this very commercialized, very, glitzy entertainment district. I think
it has to be its own thing.
Yeah.
It has to be its own thing. Big Apple Inn is down there as well, nationally renowned, nationally known. We've got historic buildings on that street. And when you're talking about getting foot traffic there, there's a lot of different ways that you can make that foot traffic happen, and you guys are working towards that. I think one question that a lot of people want to know is what is your time frame? When can people start looking and visibly seeing, even if it's slow and tedious, you can start seeing some visible changes down there?
So I've been telling everybody 12 to 18 months. Again, when we're working with developers aren't that seasoned, obviously the timeline gets extended. We're already having very productive conversations about trying to attract new market tax credits to the 300 block. And so my goal is, we're putting a team together, this kind of advisory team, if you will, of makers and other folks, to begin having conversations, because it's going to have to be a different thought process to get investment there. And so having those voices there, having them there in the beginning, helping us kind of draft what this looks like is the main thing. But my goal is really within the next 12 months to make some really major announcements about some major projects. And it just takes one. You do one thing, and then it grows and it catches momentum. But that is the goal and the objective. Like I said, we're already trying to identify those different financing sources. it takes, once you even identify financing, it takes a few months to get that in place. When we do new market tax credits, somebody has to buy those tax credits, so you're getting them to say, hey, we're going to, gamble on Farish Street. So I mean, it's a hard lift. So it's just going to take some time for us to get through that part of it.
Now, you talked about, another project that wasn't necessarily in downtown, and I think that's important. I think you spoke about the Highway 80 corridor, and I think that's probably one of, after Farish Street, one of the most important areas that we need to be working on. We've lost a lot of businesses in that corridor. It used to be a very busy and bustling, lane for business, and it stretches through, a couple of cities. So, have you guys kind of looked and foreshadowed what you could do on Highway 80 through this one project? Talk about that project, and then talk about, whether or not you guys have a long term for actually maybe doing some of the same things out there on that corridor.
Yeah, so one of the goals that I have is to do, just like we're doing this TOD master plan, is to actually master plan each one of these urban renewal zones that we have. And so what we'll be doing is creating a whole nother master plan for that Highway 80 corridor that will then focus around community input, discussions about how do we bring new investment into that area. And so that's my goal, is over the next 6 to 8 months is to get funding for these master plans for these other urban renewal zones. And so you'll see a document come out of that, because you got to have that plan in place, right? So you'll have a document that we could then go out and seek investments in those areas. But I've talked to most of the elected officials, the council folks, and they make us aware that there's other parts of the city.
You're going to get that. So it kind of segues into my next question. How has your conversations been with the city officials? How's your conversations been with the mayor? Because I know the mayor still has a hand in appointing people who are on your board. You guys actually right now, I think maybe have 2 or 3 actual spots on the board that need to be filled right now. So you've got to work with the mayor and the city council to get those filled. So how has that relationship been in the 4 months that you've been here and talking back and forth with those folks?
Yeah, at this point I've met with most of the council people. We've had a couple of meetings with the mayor as well, just talking about how can we be proactive and building a partnership and a team. They really haven't been really in-depth conversations. It's kind of more of an introductory conversation, but just getting a sense of where they are with JRA and understanding the dynamics that exist with that relationship, and then work on things that we need to work on together, and then being proactive about making sure we're addressing their needs and their concerns and their own boards. And so I think that's important. Obviously, they're there to represent the people that are in their specific district, and so they're going to have specific wants and needs, and as much as JRA can play a part of that, we want to be a partner with them to address some of the things in their respective areas. But they've been really positive. I mean, I think people understand that it's a new day and time at JRA.
Yes.
We can talk about what's happened in the past, but that's not going to get us anywhere. Definitely want to be mindful so we don't repeat those things again.
Right.
But we can't stay there. We got to move forward if we're going to make any real change happen. And so I think that's been the bulk of the conversation, is that they feel as though JRA is moving in the right direction, which is always a great conversation to have. They've been pleased with the board, and I will say this: I'm only here because of the board. You don't leave your own company to come work for somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely.
And come work with people who aren't progressive in thought, who aren't trying to do it. And that's been my experience with the board, is that they're trying to be transformative in what's going on. And they've been very supportive of the work that we do. We make sound decisions. We don't have to go round and round, back and forth. If it makes good business sense, they vote for it. If it doesn't, they say, hey, Chris, let's go back and relook at this. And so that's all you can ask for with a governing board.
Right. Those decisions that come out of JRA, how much of that has to be rubber stamped by the city council and by the mayor? I think a lot of people are asking the question of, how close is this relationship and who relies on the other? Can the JRA make some of these changes without having the minutia and the red tape of going through the council and getting things approved or going through the mayor? So on what things can you guys act independently of, and on what things are you going to have some buy-in from city government?
Sure. Well, you won't buy in from city government because we're partners in this, right? It's not a this is us, that's you type situation. We're partners. Now, there's powers that's granted to JRA. It has autonomy. It's other than the power of appointment, and the fact that they give some financing to JRA every year for operations. It's an autonomous board.
Okay.
So there's, I mean,
That was
obviously,
my question, yeah.
obviously we want to work together. It's not, oh, well, we're going to do this in Spike, what y'all want to do. But there's nothing that I've done since I've been here that we've had to run through the city and see that the board makes a decision and we go out and do it. Obviously, when you're talking about bond financing and stuff like that, because you're using the credit worthiness of the city,
right,
and that obviously those are different discussions. But when it comes to the day-to-day operations, what GRA does with its property, if it goes out and gets some independent financing, none of that stuff goes through the city. That's all done independently and separate.
I think that's a question that a lot of people have because, you know, we've seen people have good ideas. They got stifled because of the red tape that happens. And I think it's good that you guys are acting autonomously in that regard. You've got a lot of good ideas, and you know, people want to see some type of movement on what's happening with downtown, with Farish Street, whether it be on the Highway 80 corridor as well. I think that's important. Real quick before we wrap, of course, you were coming over here from Atlanta, and we talked about the water and the infrastructure issues that Atlanta is having over there, and you mirrored that to what you heard about Jackson, Mississippi as well. You've been there for 4 months. You've had a chance to kind of go out, you know, dine out a little bit, maybe take in some of the sights. I don't know how much of the nightlife you've been able to take in, but, you know, when you come out and you've seen the city as a person coming here from Atlanta and understanding in a lot of instances that there are cities all over the country that are experiencing this thing, you know, how would you compare these two experiences and, you know, where Atlanta was at one point and where Jackson is right now as we're blossoming, we're trying to grow in the same fashion?
Well, you know, I have an interesting perspective as someone who grew up in Atlanta, because I remember Atlanta before the Olympics.
Yes, before 96, yes.
And that was a lifetime ago if you think about it now.
Yeah,
but it's, you know, Atlanta really was a sleepy town. It closed down at 5. Everybody went home from downtown. Nothing really happened after that. I mean, you had spots, just like in Jackson. You have little spots that are open late, but for the most part, it's a ghost town at night. And so that's kind of the reference point that I have. And then you look at Atlanta now, which is now it's pretty much a 24-hour city. So I look at it from that lens that, you know, we have a lot of opportunity to go somewhere. There's blueprints all around us, right? So, you know, Atlanta, even Birmingham, you look at Memphis, you look at Austin and Houston and all of those places. You know, New Orleans is a different creature to itself. But,
yes, it is indeed.
But you look at, you know, what those cities have done to kind of transform their economies. You know, it's not rocket science. And I think the thing everybody talks about Atlanta, and of course I've seen the growth and the transition since '96. The thing that I think makes it great is just the sense of those communities. When you think about Atlanta and you go there, the places you go are places where the mom and pop places. You don't really think about the commercialized part of Atlanta. You think about hanging out at East Atlanta Village, Krog Street, or Old Fourth Ward, you know, Chattahoochee Food Works. So those are just all little small places that have been developed over the last 15, 20 years that really is what's driving, and the best way to describe it is quality of life. So that's the thing when you talk about the exodus of people from Jackson, Mississippi. They're going to go find that quality of life. It's not that there's anything wrong with Jackson. It's just we need to build the amenities that people want when they're not at work. See, we think about, when we talk about workforce development, you're talking about 9 to 5, I got a job. That's great, but now people can work anywhere. They want to know, if I want to go out at 9 o'clock at night, is there somewhere nice I can go that's open? Or if I want to go and take my kids somewhere, and there's lots of stuff in Jackson. There's museums, there's trails. I mean, we're not saying there's not things here. We just need a diversity of things to appeal to a broader audience, and that's what we hope to do with GRA. Is you should come here and there should be something for everyone. All the time. And I think that's what it is.
One of the things that I think you guys did in putting, you know, that redevelopment week together, the economic development week, and Jai talked about it a little bit, you gave the citizens a chance to actually come in and ask questions and kind of be involved in the process. Are you guys going to be doing a little bit more of that in the future?
Yes. So every community I've ever worked in, we've always done economic development week. That's why I was so adamant about JRA participating. It is a great opportunity to educate the community about the work that you're doing. Because they don't ever hear from us until they see us on the news. And a lot of times it's not for positive stuff. So we need to create opportunities for them to hear from us other than the negative. And this helps us be able to control the narrative, right? We get to tell people what the real story is, because you're getting a 30-second news clip, or you're reading an article in the newspaper. That doesn't give the whole story. That's just that little soundbite. But everything has to be put in context and perspective. And I think when you do stuff like Economic Development Week or coming on shows like this, right? These are important conversations because we get to tell a more deep dive. Like, oh, well, that stuff you did was dumb. I say it looks dumb on the surface, but let's talk about these things. And you'd be like, oh, I didn't think about it like that. Yeah. And I think that's how you build trust as well. People say, okay, we don't necessarily agree with what you did, but after talking to you, I understand more why that decision was made.
Building cachet is very important in the community, and we appreciate all that you've done so far and all the things that you're going to do. Christopher Pike, the Executive Director of the Jackson Redevelopment Authority. The board is changing and it's evolving, and it sounds like it got a lot of good things, but we're going to make sure we keep watching what those guys are doing, and we're going to look for some great things going on Farish Street as well. So, of course, if you guys got any comments or any other questions, you can hit us on the inbox in the Facebook page. You can email us at goodthingsjacksonshow@yahoo.com, goodthingsjacksonshow@yahoo.com. And we'll try to get these questions over to Christopher Pike. But we thank you for all the good stuff that you're doing. We're going to have you back, of course, as these projects develop.
Absolutely.
And we want to make sure that you guys stay tuned with us again. All right, Sundays, 2 o'clock right here. This is the show we're talking about, changing the narrative, talking about all the positive things in the city of Jackson. So for the whole 97.7 crew, this is Brad Kamikaze Franklin. It's the Good Things Jackson Show. We're going to holler at you guys next week. All right, peace and power.